the president of Liftport Group. We've been doing these shows now for about 5 months, so thank you for joining us and being a part of this. We do this show, it's this intersection of space commercialization, but what does that mean? So we look at that intersection of policy, of infrastructure, and how do you pay for it, the financials of it. Within that, we kind of developed 3 different kind of formats for our shows. Sometimes we do a deep dive into a technical document or a new report. We did that last week and the week before. Sometimes we do a news recap. We haven't done a lot of those lately because there's been so much going on and we've had such great guests. And the third way that we do it is with a guest show. So we're doing this Mondays and Wednesdays, twice a week, 8 times or 9 times a month. And it's been a lot of fun. We've had some tremendous guests. We have some really cool people coming up. I really want to make some announcements about 2 of the people coming up. I've got this smirk, but I'm not going to say it until we've got their people who have confirmed they're going to be on the show. So we're still a little waiting for that, but it's a pretty big deal. I'm just going to tell y'all it's kind of fun and kind of a big deal. So fingers crossed that we're able to. I will give you a hint when I say we have to clear things with the public affairs officers. Okay, public affairs officers are involved with our next 2 guests, so we're super excited about them. So if we got that, that's great. We do have some other terrific guests coming. If you missed it, check out Jeremy Grimmett from Rogue Space last week. That was a super informative show. The interview was great. There was a lot of information. Our own team learned some pretty important stuff that we talked about afterwards. So definitely worth checking that out. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on background stuff because I want to make sure we got a lot of time. We actually have 2 guests tonight. That's the first time we've done 2 guests. So I want to make sure that we've got plenty of time for them. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and bring them on. Hang on a second, folks. Okay, and let me do this. Okay. All right. So the way we always do this is we start with an origin story. Now, I have both of your bios, but I never just sit and read a boring bio, right? Because it just seems really stilted, and I really want to hear your origin story in your own words. So, Jeff, let's go ahead and have you start. Let's talk 7 to 10 minutes. Really dig into it, right? Background, story, how'd you get into space? Why are you here? We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Center for Space Commerce and Finance first, but later. But let's dig into each of your personal stories here. All right, Jeff, go ahead and go.
So, first, thanks very much, Michael, for inviting me and Tom as well. This will be a lot of fun. I mean, we've known each other for, I don't know, quite a long time. From a galaxy far, far away. So this is great. I've been looking forward to this. So I like the way you put that origin story. I think that's really apt. For me, my earliest memories of being fascinated with space are as a child. I don't know, 10, 11 years old or so. I used to, after dinner, go out in our backyard at night and just lay on the lawn gazing up at the moon. Now, at that age, I didn't really understand what that was about, and what it was about, I think, has changed over the course of my life. But I was drawn, almost compelled. I mean, it was just something that pulled me.
Right.
And now, did I know, oh, well, that means my career is going to be blah, 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 but I learned early on I had this fascination with space. And I can remember various stages in my life, like turning points, if you will, right? So the next thing, look on the wall behind me. I mean, you can
Right.
see what's up there, and that television show, the original Star Trek series, and that movie 2001 Space Odyssey had very strong impacts on my life in terms of continuing to evolve my fascination with space and space exploration, uh, and still at a young age where I really didn't understand what that meant. Uh, my I was 11 or 12 years old when 2001 Space Odyssey was at the theater, and I guess I saw a movie trailer, and I told my dad, "You've got to take me to see this." Now, neither of my parents were science fiction fans. They really didn't understand, my interest in it. They just weren't, right? And which is fine. A lot of people aren't into science fiction. And for those of you who've seen the movie, and if you remember the very end of the movie where the Star Child is orbiting the Earth, so I'm like 10, 11 years old, right? And I turned to my dad and I asked him, what does that mean?
Right.
And he said, "I have no idea." So
It's a 50-year-old
like,
movie.
okay,
They're still debating what the ending of that movie means.
right, which
Yeah.
is brilliant in and of itself.
Yeah.
So, there was another one of those just like little points of like exposure to space and space exploration and science fiction, and all wove together for me. And then, in college, I met a couple other folks that I became very good friends with who loved the original Star Trek series. And we used to watch Star Trek, we had a color television down on the first floor of the dorm we lived in, and we would commandeer this television at night to watch Star Trek reruns when they were on. So I just had this pull. So fast forward, probably the next big turning point was deciding where to go to graduate school. I mean, I knew that I was not going to be an astronaut because I don't have the
That's a big jump.
mathematical.
You went from 10, 11, 12 to graduate school.
Yeah, because that's just another,
Okay.
pivot point, if you
Okay.
will. Nothing significant in terms of my origin story really happened in high school
Okay.
or college, other than realizing I was not going to be an astronaut because I just didn't have the aptitude to be a mathematically oriented career, an engineer or anything like that. So when I was in my senior year of college, and I have a major in psychology and sociology because that's was fascinating to me, and that's where I thought I would do professionally. And then I learned about this graduate program at the University of Houston, the Clear Lake campus, which is adjacent to Johnson Space Center.
Right.
And they had a program for many years, they don't anymore, called Future Studies. There's a Master's of Science in Future Studies, where you really learned how to do qualitative and quantitative analysis and put the dots together, as we now say, and understand the interrelationship and correlation of things that don't really seem to have any relationship to each other whatsoever. But the main thing that drew me there was it's adjacent to Johnson Space Center, and I'm going to focus that program and whatever classes I take and whatever work I do on space, whatever that might be. So this was 1979 to 1981. I wrote a paper on the economic aspects of space-based solar power back in like 1980,
Wow.
which I probably still have somewhere. Right. I did some projects at the university related to space, but the next turning point for me was instead of writing a thesis, we had an option. We could write a thesis, or we could do a graduate internship for like 4 or 5 months in the last semester of the program. And I chose to do a graduate internship. And I wanted to do something related to space. So I wrote to all these different government agencies in DC, because that's what there was when it came to space.
Right.
And I ended up getting accepted to do a graduate internship in the International Affairs Division at NASA headquarters in DC
Cool.
in the first half of 1981. And it was a fascinating experience for me. My first time really working with professionals in that industry. And I remember, so I was in high level meetings. Really, really cool stuff. And I remember one meeting in particular where we learned that the budget was being cut for something. And I was pissed. And I'm like, I'm this grad student, I'm not steeped in professional decorum and, like everybody else is. I was pissed, and it was obvious to everyone else in the room that I was pissed. And I just was like starting to rant, and the head of the International Affairs Division office, let me have my piece. And he said, we all feel the same way you do, but this is part of what we deal with, right? Sometimes we get our budget requests, sometimes we don't. And I'm sorry, I forgot. Actually, when I was in college in DC, I had a summer job at NASA headquarters in a different office. I forgot about that. Right. So I had some really cool experiences. In fact, that summer job was when Skylab came down.
Oh, right.
It burned up in the atmosphere, and a big chunk of it landed in Australia. And I happened to be working in the office that took the phone call from whoever called from Australia to say, we have some of your Skylab here. And I'm not sure. I think it was during lunch, and like there was no one else there, and I was there, and I answered the phone. I think this is an accurate memory. And someone was calling from Australia, and I'm sure I said something like, well, hold on, let me get somebody. So that was a cool experience. And then in graduate school, I had that internship at NASA, and this was when the first space shuttle went up, Columbia, the first test launch.
Right.
And so I got to be at headquarters for that. We were all downstairs in this big auditorium and watching that. So my internship comes to an end. I had to make a decision, and I was engaged at the time, did not end up marrying this young lady, but we had an agreement. If I got a job in DC, she'd move there. If not, I'd move back to Houston. Well, the first half of 1981, Reagan was president. There was a federal hiring freeze.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get a job.
Right.
They wanted to hire me at that NASA office. I went and interviewed with the CIA, the director of the office that monitored the Soviet space program. He wanted to hire me. Can't do that right now because of the hiring freeze. And there may have been one or two other opportunities. I just can't remember. So I went back to Houston, and I was like, okay, now what? And my fiance said, you know what? You should go interview with IBM. They have a big office at Johnson Space Center. They are hiring sales reps and systems engineers. Decide what you want to interview for. They'll train you. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I went and interviewed to be a systems engineer, got hired. I made it clear that as soon as there was an opening on the NASA team at Johnson Space Center, I wanted to be on that team. About 4 or 5 months later, there was an opening. So from 1981 through about the middle of 1985, I was an IBM systems engineer at Johnson Space Center. I did not work directly on the shuttle program. My responsibilities were more with some of the supporting offices that supported the direct space shuttle team, part of which was a different IBM office. But the main thing, and this is what led to another turning point, was after being on the NASA team and being inside and part of and working with NASA every day for almost 5 years, I realized that this was not the same NASA that had taken us to the moon. It had become a bureaucratic, risk-averse, sclerotic organization, very broken as far as I was concerned, even though I still was fascinated by and loved the shuttle. And I couldn't stand to be a part of it anymore. I mean, it was an emotional turmoil moment for me. Here's something I love that I had become disgusted with because of realizing this isn't doing anything that we all want.
Right.
And I couldn't stand to be a part of it. So I told my boss, I need to get off this team. When there's an opening back at the main IBM building, I want to transfer there and work in a different industry, whatever, which I ended up doing. And I worked in IT for like 25 years, sometimes with aerospace, but most often not. So I was like, now what do I do? I'm not part of something I love and desperately want to be part of and desperately want to contribute to, but I couldn't stand to be a part of NASA at that time because I was broken and I can't fix it. I wrote an op-ed about this for the Houston Chronicle, the second one I wrote about space at the time, and it was called The End of a Love Affair. And that is how I felt.
Okay.
So, late 1980s, 88, 89, I learned, I became involved with the Houston chapter of the National Space Institute, which was before it became the National Space Society when it merged with L5. And that chapter was doing a fundraiser to raise funds to have the first private lunar satellite that would map the surface of the moon for ores, minerals, what have you. And I think it was called Lunar Prospector. It never raised enough money. But one of the people who came in to sort of rally the troops and talk about it was Jim Muncie, one of the co-founders of the Space Frontier Foundation, which had probably within the last year or so just been founded. And I volunteered to pick him up at the airport. I didn't know who he was. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to pick up the guy. That's how I learned about the Space Frontier Foundation. Now, this is 1989, or 1990 at the latest. And it was from Jim and maybe a few others that I started to learn about, commercial space, entrepreneurial space, when there was almost nothing going on at that time. That was a absolute mind shift for me. Didn't just have to be NASA. And so I became involved with the Space Frontier Foundation, started helping run conferences, eventually running conferences. I became the first director.
Just 1 second, Jeff. Jeff, I don't want to interrupt this flow, but we're going to have an entire episode focused on the Space Frontier Foundation. So same thing with you, Tom.
I'll move on.
Like I don't like, this is super important stuff, but we're going to have a full episode exclusively dedicated to the pioneers of the Space Frontier.
Okay, so no problem. I'll move on from that. So, so that, I stayed involved with the space industry I started blogging. I was, I wrote a monthly column called Think About It for several chapters of the National Space Society. So I was a quote unquote syndicated columnist, which meant, in fact, that I was able to get a press pass, which I still have, to the second launch of the DCX in September 1993, right? So I found ways to stay involved, even though professionally I wasn't working in the industry.
Right.
So fast forward, not talking about the Space Frontier Foundation, about 15 years ago, I decided I really want to transition out of the IT industry as a career and figure out a way to be a speaker and a writer and consultant. Having no clue how to go about doing it, having no clue how difficult it was going to be. But you know what? That's what I wanted to do, and I stuck with it. That's, all I do now for about the last 7 years or so is consulting wrapped around primarily the commercial space industry, some defense-related aspects of it, some NASA sometimes, but mostly working with startups, but larger companies as well. So that's what my Earth Space Commerce Advisors consulting businesses. One of my clients since 2019 is a startup called Orbital Transports, which does everything related to small satellite missions. They're headquartered in Chicago. So I'm their fractional VP of business growth, which is business development, market research, strategic guidance, in a nutshell. So I skipped around a lot there, but that brings me current. And like you said, we'll talk about the Space Frontier Foundation aspect of my life. And I guess I'll just close out by saying that It's been an amazing experience. It filled with a lot of highs and lows, a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration to just follow my passion and have an amazing wife who's basically said, go for it when I said I want to leave one career and create another. And do what I know I'm here to do. It's why I'm here. That was one of the questions you asked, I think, Michael, as you were, this origin story. I don't know what I'd be doing with myself now if I wasn't doing this. People ask me, am I going to retire? And I'm like, when I die, probably, because I love what I'm doing. I don't want to have a full-time job. I don't see myself stopping this consulting until I'm sitting in a rocking chair drooling and, and unable to think and speak and write, as John Adams.
Yeah, a rocking chair that might be located on the lunar surface or orbit, right?
Even better.
Yeah.
So
terrific. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Appreciate it. Stick around. We're going to talk about the Space Commerce and Finance Center here in a minute. Tom, you're up, buddy.
Okay, how do I follow that up? Okay, I'm going to try to get to the good bits quickly. What few there are. Although I have to date myself. We talk about an origin story. Part of my origin story, we started 52 years ago. This coming Friday, May 5th,
wow,
was the first U.S. space flight. Alan Shepard, 15 minutes. I was there. I saw it on TV. That's how old I am. So I was already between my freshman and sophomore years in high school when we landed on the moon. Now I was determined I got to be an astronaut. I got to do something like that. And it didn't quite work out that way, like it doesn't for most people. Tens of thousands are called and a handful are chosen. So I could skip all the gory details of that. But I got to tell you, like Jeff, I got a degree in something else entirely. And it has nothing to do with why we're here today. My degree is in biology. And I actually get through graduate school and did some stuff with that. Well, actually, because my original goal was I wanted to find a microbe on Mars. I wrote an undergrad paper in my evolution class called exobiology. And everything they knew about how origins of life happened on Earth at the time in 1974, I wrote all about and said, here's how we might do similar things to try to look for signs of evolved life forms, even in a micro.
Hold on. I have known you for 20 years, and I've never heard that story.
Well, the thing is, I feel like it blew the professor away. His head exploded, right. And it was like Captain Kirk doing the Kobayashi Maru. I got an A, but mostly for original thinking. So that was a highlight of my undergrad career. But then after I studied to a master's level in environmental science, and then a few years later, I ended up like Jeff. I ended up getting into IT because I was doing medical work at the time, and I was right in the middle of the AIDS crisis in the 80s. I thought, you know what? I'm starting to get into this computer thing, and a computer virus may ruin my day, but it's not going to hurt me. So I moved over at 30. I stayed in that for 31 years. But to really skip ahead to what made me who I am, I mean, I did in graduate school, I did briefly belong to a local L5 chapter. So we have on campus. So we had a little connection there as well.
For those that don't know, L5 was one of the precursors of the National Space Society also.
Yeah. But so I just got into a career path for a while, and I skipped on the space stuff because I realized we're not going to Mars anytime soon, and the shuttle is just going to go around in circles for God knows how many years, and it just wasn't. And I got that similar feeling of discouragement that Jeff got, just from a completely different place. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I just let it go. And then around 1996, around that era, I picked up this really interesting book. I don't even know why, almost. It just fascinated me on the shelf. We were still buying books in bookstores. It was by a guy named Robert Zubrin called The Case for Mars. And all of a sudden, my eyes were opened again. I thought there's life in this old dog after all, and especially when there's a chapter devoted to using to try to beef up and utilize and build a new robust commercial space sector to help build the high frontier. I got even more interested, and I reached out to Bob Zubrin, and I was one of the original members of the Mars Society, and I went to a few interesting conferences between 1999 and 2002 or so. And about that
we met at the
2002 at ISDC in Denver in 2002, and that's where life changed again. Because I was going to the conferences again, and I was looking at everything. I was doing far more business-related stuff at that point in the IT industry and other places, and I realized that all these guys, and you and I both were seeing them, Michael. All these guys were making brilliant engineers, making all sorts of incredible ideas for space technology and how it might be commercialized, had no clue how business works, had no idea how investment companies operated, and no idea how to pitch them to people to get real money. And a lot of them just wouldn't be funded. They just wouldn't, to this day, these guys wouldn't be funded. And you and I spent hours at a dinner table, maybe at a bar stool somewhere, scribbling madly on cocktail napkins and talking about what might be better, what might happen. And I think I have to say, it was years later, but the seeds for the Center for Space Commerce and Finance and the projects, more importantly, that they do were sown that day. Through that connection and through that friendship that we've built over the years. In 2009, I was asked to participate through the Space Frontier Foundation in a project they had called the New Space Business Plan Competition. And that's where a lot of the team first came together. Jeff was there. Megan Crawford was help running things. You might have been around.
Probably not. Not
a bunch of other.
I was having some bad days for a while.
Well, that was the time we were putting together these kind of the interesting things that we ended up doing for a long time. And that's why I always mark that. That's when we started, because we have done because to fast forward again, as of the end of last year, we had done 22 New Space Business Plan competitions. And
so that's a great segue. Hold on a second. That's a great segue. So are you kind of done with your origin story, and now we're moving on to the Center for Space Commerce?
Well, we're gonna get there. The whole idea of this, I was end up going through and going to a lot with that new focus. I was doing a lot more presentations. So I helped found the business track at ISDC, and I helped found a business track as far as IAC, the International Astronautical Congress, in 2008. And then we did something called the Space Investment Summit, and we started going, bring investors into the room, and we've been doing that since 2007. Exactly. So, and that's how it all kind of came together in this one unique place, and where we have all this knowledge and all this information, and we probably, and if we go to the BPCs alone, 22 of them, we've probably helped train well over 100 companies, startup companies, into getting visible, and probably helped out of those, probably 40 of them actually really moved on and did really well and got connections and got funding and are still viable companies to this day. That's something I want to start shouting from the rooftops right now.
All right, so let's so that's the background. All right, so we've heard Jeff's origin story. Meandered a little bit, had some first loves, meandered a little bit, came back to it after a career in IT. Tom meandered a little bit, had some first loves, came back to it after a career in IT. So you're both coming at this from the perspective of, let's make something work. Let's do something real. Let's do it right now, right? And let's not gloss over being a little bit disgruntled, a little bit frustrated with the process, the status quo at our national space programs, right? So you're looking at it from the perspective of market metrics, right? How do you do this stuff from a financial perspective? Because there's a lot of great engineering out there. So let's dig into the Center for Space Commerce and Finance. Let's first describe it in a big way, what it is and kind of why it exists. And I want both of you to kind of throw in your own perspectives here. And then we'll talk about its history, and then we'll talk about where it is, and then we'll talk about where it's going. All right. We have about half an hour, and I'm really strict about our timing. So let's talk about, what is the Center for Space Commerce and Finance in your own words. I'll post I just posted the link to the to the site. I'm doing that right now. So
Tom, go ahead.
Oh, okay. The center was an outgrowth, actually. That wasn't a planned thing. It became one later. It started out because in 2015, Space Frontier Foundation wanted to spin out the New Space Business Plan competition and to go its own way, like it had done with Teachers in Space project. They wanted to move on to other things. Is that okay? And we were doing a lot of good work, and Megan and I sat down, and Jeff was involved in the conversation. Michael, you were involved in the conversation later.
Yeah.
We didn't want all that good work we'd done to just go away. So we thought, well, we have all this great knowledge that we've built up. We have these things we know how to do really well. And all this like kind of an intellectual IP, that we have. And we had kind of an initial budget because there were sponsored budgets lines associated with that project that followed us out the door. Mm-hmm. So we hit the ground running with about $25,000 from the Space Frontier Foundation, and then we got a couple of sponsors later, for a lot more to get us going. And basically, we just became this educational organization that was both educating entrepreneurs and how to do better, to pitch their ideas to interested investors. We also want to educate investors about the possibilities in space. Mm-hmm. If maybe you've invested in tech and made billions, or you've invested in real estate and made hundreds of millions of dollars, and now you're interested in other aspects of life, and you're looking at, well, what else can I get into? And that market opportunity was just getting started, right, especially around 2015. Since 2015, over $53 billion in capital has been invested in space. And we can talk about the prospects for the future later. There's some interesting news there, but let's stick with the center for right now. But basically, we put on shows. We put on shows. Right. We put on the New Space Business Plan competition. We've done 22 of them. We put on the Space Investment Summit. We've done, about 10 or 12 of those too over the years since 2007. We've been doing those off and on. The latest BPC, as we call it for short, it was the first one we've done truly internationally on a live stage at the International Astronautical Congress in Paris last September. We had some really great teams in there. And one of the things that we do that a lot of places don't, there are a lot of outfits right now that want to do pitch events, space pitch events. Mm-hmm. Most of them, the vast majority of them, even though some of them are with big organizations and they're better funded, all they're doing is they're handing the players a stage. They do a little bit of due diligence to see, who fits on that stage. But they're basically handing them a stage, and your pitch deck is limited to this, and good luck to you. We do service after the sale. We go through a very intensive screening process to find really, really good finalists, and then we spend some time working with them much prior to the event. When we were doing virtual things during the COVID issue, we were doing this all with Zoom calls. Right. But before that, and we were doing it as part of conferences. And so we actually take a day in advance of the actual event, and we'd have a very intensive 1 day or day and a half boot camp, which Jeff is very familiar with. And I like him to talk a little more about that, because that's one of the things I think is part of our secret sauce. Is why we do so well. I'll shut up.
No. I think I overused the amount of time for my origin story, so I wanted to let you have some time. And Tom, you're more well steeped in the history of the center and the formation of it than I am. So
well, let's drill into some specifics here. So the center does a couple different things, right? So I think it's best known for its business plan competition. So let's talk about what that is, what it looks like, the screening process. We're going to answer some questions here in a bit. In a bit, so Daniel and Doug will get to your questions here in a moment. But let's talk about the business plan competition. What is it? What's it for? Who gets in? What do they get? And who, win, lose, draw. What is this? What's the point of it?
Okay. The point of it is what we're doing really at its core. We're trying to simulate a real world pitch environment that a company seeking initial funding might make to a Silicon Valley investor or some other kind of investment group that's interested in their company. You're going to have 15 minutes. If you're lucky, you'll have a deck with about 10 slides in it. And you got to get really slick at pitching your idea, because these guys are sitting in a room with a table. You're showing your slides. You have 15 minutes, probably 8 of that you're going to actually talk and wave your arms and show your slides. And the other 7 minutes, you're going to get grilled to death by these investors. And then you're out, and then the next group comes in. They may do that all day long for a couple of days, and then they'll do it again next month. And this is what happens. And so we're trying to help them, simulate how that works and really throw it at them like a Shark Tank kind of thing, so they can hone their pitch and really be better at it. We do it as it is a competition. It is a pitch competition. There are prizes. We have some in-kind prizes now and then, but most of the times we just get sponsored cash prizes. It's been as low as $2,500, from a small investor group. And then there was a brief period there where we had a big NASA grant. We worked off of that for like 3 years, and we were awarding, $25,000 grand prizes and even a $100,000 grand prize a couple of times. Yeah. I mean, all total, when you add it all up over the last 15 years, we probably awarded somewhere between $400,000 and $450,000 in total prize money to various companies. And also what we try to do, because we do get investors in the room, they do want to see these things, and the ability to network and make those connections is really, really important. And we've just gotten really good at that over the years.
Yeah. Let's talk about the companies who have gone through. Tom, you mentioned about hundreds. I think it's hundreds.
It's 100 or so, possibly.
Well, so wait, because it's 100 that have been in the competition,
yeah.
And then there's the vetting funnel.
Oh, yeah. There have been hundreds are called 100 total over 15 years may have been chosen.
Yeah.
And then maybe 40 of those actually went on to do something really, really interesting. Which is, I think, is numbers. It's a good track record to have.
Crazy track record. It really is. Yeah. It might have been a $5,000, $10,000, even $25,000 prize, but there are some companies, even the ones that didn't win, have gone on to get some big successes afterwards. So
one of our poster children for that is a company called Spire.
Yep.
You've heard of them. They
I was just thinking.
They did. They participated in our 2012 event. They did not win, but one of the investors in the audience was really smitten with them, and we facilitated the introduction, and that guy helped raise them their first $1 million.
Yeah.
In the U.S.
That's the Peter Platzer, right? Is the CEO Spire?
Yep.
So that company was called Nano Satisfied.
Nano Satisfied.
I remember when they were. And I remember Peter, and I guess he had 2 or 3 of his colleagues with him. I remember them from the boot camp. Yeah.
Well, so the thing you're asking, we do have a vetting process.
It's not just Spire, right? There's a bunch that have.
There's a bunch.
Skyrora out in Scotland has turned into a giant company.
Yep.
They did win. They did
win. There's actually my 2 favorite ones right now are from other places in the world, though. I mean, that was a UK company, but I got two of my favorites now are out of Latin America. And the winner of the Paris event last year was a company called Astrolintu. They want to do ground base station services for satellites and other orbital stuff. And they're based in Ecuador. And they're a very interesting company. There's another one called Innova Space. They're doing things on very, very low bandwidth stuff with Internet of Things through little picosats that they launch. And I've actually held these things in my hand. They're not much bigger than the palm of my hand. And they can launch hundreds of them at once. And they're doing IoT services, but they're helping. But actually, the vision of that is they're actually helping farmers in Argentina, gather data. Yeah. So on a very, very narrow little bandwidth. But
that's one of the things is. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I want to say two things. I want to get Jeff in on this because you were asking, what's the process? I mean, we put out a call. It used to be through a mass market email, but now we have this website and an application form, and I have a mailing list, and I put it out there to everybody. And I got a thing on LinkedIn. We do it, and we have other social media presence. And so when we have a competition, they're invited to click the link. They go in, they fill out a basic form, and then they attach their a 1, 2, 3 page executive summary. Mm-hmm. And it starts with that. And we have a crew of people that I rotate through. There's about a dozen people, really, really, really good people, well-known people in their industry. A lot of them are involved in entrepreneurship and investment. I know one of them's in a big investment bank, in Ottawa. And so they look through these and they have a basic filter. We've created a form that's about 10 questions, 10 or 12 questions, and it always comes out to, at the end, would you put your own money into this? And so that's, so you get percentages, and you have this big thing that we go through. Then we have this conversation and wave our arms a lot and talk about it. And usually we end up on the same page, all of us, and we end up with between 5 and 8 good companies that we say, okay, these are our finalists. We had 25 apply, but these 8 really, really get to the top. Right. And then we arrange for everything for them. They're coming to the conference when it's at a conference event. And then then the day before, they have this boot camp experience. And Jeff, who knows a lot more about handling the boot camp than I do, time to speak to the boot camp experience and why that's so important.
And it's really, in some cases, if it's a first-time entrepreneur, which a lot of them have been, mm-hmm. It's their first exposure to having their presentation ripped to shreds, which is so much fun for those of us that are mentoring them in the boot camp. And that's when the education begins. Okay,
but it's not about being a jerk. It's about making them.
No, it is. Right. It is about helping them understand what the potential investor does care about and doesn't care about, and something that we see time after time after time, which is completely understandable. So what I'm saying isn't criticisms; it's observations. It's something to learn from. You think about it, all space companies are built around some kind of technology, and almost always the founder of the company is a deeply technical, deeply engineering, deeply scientific person. That's what they know. That's what they do. That's what they love. And they often suck at sales and presenting and understanding the business aspect of what they're doing. And that is often reflected in the first run through of their pitch deck. Too much emphasis on the technology, not enough on, well, what's the problem that you're solving? How are you going to solve it? How big is the market? Why would anybody be interested in this? And so that's what I'm referring to. And so we go through this iterative process where they get critiqued by the other finalists as well, when we're all in a room together, as well as all of the coaches that are involved. And we'll do this 2, 3, a couple times. It's been 4 iterations to get them ready to do a presentation. And
oh my gosh, they get better and better.
It's
and better.
unbelievable.
Night and day.
You know, Michael and Tom, you do too, right? The difference between the
It's
first
night
one
and
and third or fourth
Yep.
is phenomenal. And I also want to say, and I'm not saying this to pat us on the shoulder, but to make a point. We often hear at the conclusion of a BPC that the most useful part of it was the coaching that they got.
Mhm.
More so than if they won the prize, even when it was a much larger prize. And that's really very rewarding for all of us to hear. But I'm saying this because whoever's watching, you know, this is a valuable experience for entrepreneurs, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur and this is your first company. The other thing I want to say is, as this industry has evolved, what we still call the new space industry, even though that's an old term now. You know, you remember for many years, there were no non-US startups that were part of the BPC because there just weren't very many anywhere else in the world. And look how that's changed in the last 5 years or so. And so that's reflected in, like Tom was saying, 2 companies in Latin America, for example. The other thing that the BPC reflects is how the industry is evolving. Initially, it was all about launch, and now it's about so much more because launch is much more successful on a commercial basis than it used to be, of course.
Let's stick with that.
It's everything else.
Jeff, let's stick with that for a second. One of the questions from the audience, Dr. Plata was asking, you know, how much of the billions invested in space are mostly going to LEO ventures and not related to cislunar and human space flight? So do you have any of those metrics? I've got some rough numbers.
I don't off the top of my head, but while you're talking, and I saw the question and I was looking up something, and I'm going to put this in the public chat room, this is an excellent source for Doug and anyone else who wants that kind of specific data. It's the quarterly publication that Space Capital puts out that tracks all the investments.
I actually have. I have that up on my screen right now.
Yeah, perfect. I thought.
Okay, and I'm trying to.
Right. And so
trying to find the.
I got a question. I think from what I'm seeing on the charts this quarter, the vast majority of it is going to LEO stuff.
Yeah, it's north of 80%.
Yeah.
Doug, I actually did a breakdown of this actual question last week. So if you just catch our YouTube channel from last week, it's in there.
I can't find the non-private chat room link here, so
it's all right. I got it right here.
I'm going to put it in the private, and then you can grab it, Mike.
Gotcha. All right, I'll do that right now. Thanks.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Sorry, not to derail you, but you know that is kind of what we're talking about here. And Doug, you can go that reference that Jeff just posted. It's they do this every quarter. They assess all the way back to I think it's 2013. So there's a lot of data, the decade worth of data.
Yeah.
And you can, and they have 2 parts to it. There's the written part, and that's a PDF that's definitely worth reading. But also there's a digital element that's a dashboard, and you can mess with that for hours to kind of slice and dice like which year and which product and which style. It doesn't break it down between human space flight versus LEO, but there's a lot in there about infrastructure and launch and satellites and communications and that sort of stuff. So it's a pretty useful tool. Okay, back to the we've had the kinds of companies, and many of the companies who have gone through the center's processes have gone on to raise pretty significant amounts of money. And so it's really gratifying to us to see when they go through the steps, when they go through the boot camp, through the screening process, when they get up on stage. There can, bad movie, but there can be only one. There's only one person who's going to, company that's going to win. but all of them get something out of the steps. So pretty happy about that. We only have 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that we talk about the Space Investment Summit and talk about the IAC. Let's make sure we talk about the vastness of the reach that's happening now.
Okay, what's your question?
I want you to talk about the IAC quickly, and then I want you to transition to Space Investment Summits.
Okay. Yeah, this last year was the first time we attempted to do a BPC at the International Astronautical Congress. As a big event. Usually it'll be anywhere from 2,000 and 6,000 people show up for this thing annually. It's a different country every year. We were lucky last year; it was in Paris, so it was relatively open and and easy to do. There's a lot more bureaucracy to go through to get this thing done at IAC than there would be at any other space conference in the Americas. So there's a huge learning curve to this, and we didn't even know whether we're going to have a room to present everything in until like a month before, and then it was about twice the size of the room we needed, and so it seated 300. We thought 150 would be just fine, and if we got in the 150 seat room, we would have filled it, as it turns out. And so now that big room is only half full, and now some of the senior folks who don't really know what's going on. And I was like, "Well, you gave me this big room. We were supposed to fill it." No, that's not what we asked for. So we're going through that round and round. There's a bunch of other issues going on with that. It's a really interesting event and a way to do it. You have to work with a lot of disparate groups of people to get it done, as opposed to just being the cowboys that we usually are. And because we have our own methodologies and we know they work, and it's so tempting to go to these folks and say, "Look, we've done it 21 times now. We know what we're doing. Give us a room and turn us loose. We'll get it done for you. It'll be great." And it just don't happen that way. These people are Europeans, and they like their bureaucracy, and they like their committees, and they like their own procedures. And you just have to work through it and bite your tongue a lot. But the reason we even got it in there is because of my work with the Entrepreneurship and Investment Committee, which started back in 2008 in Glasgow, and all we were doing at that time, we were doing paper tracks,
right?
Business and finance paper tracks, space, and we started that in 2008, and we've been doing that every year. And a couple of years ago, the people in charge of the committee were going, "We'd like to do something different. We'd like to step it up. We'd like to get more stage time and get more recognition for what we're doing." And I raised my hand. I go, "I have an idea. Let's try this." Because I've been trying to pitch it to anyone who listened for 10 years. And finally somebody said, "Oh, okay. And guess what a mess it was to get it done. But we got it done. But because of all the issues involved in putting on one of these things, we decided, and our new board member can't be with us tonight, Lisa Labonte, but she and I are working very closely on putting in a plan and a big sponsorship plan to do. We're not going to be in Baku this year, in 2023, but next year it's in Milan, and the year after that it's in Sydney. And so we're planning on a 2-staged event and get it all funded and do them back to back and start planning it now. And so I think if we do that, it's going to be absolutely insane, and IAC is going to love it. Two straight back-to-back years, 2024 and 25. Right. And now you want to switch gears and go to Space Investment Summit.
Right, and we have really 3 minutes best.
That's easy. That was it originally was a brainchild of someone who worked at Boeing for a long time. And this started in 2007. And originally the idea was we just want investors and presenters on various space topics and the legal stuff and everything. We just want them in the room for a really intense day. People who had companies they want to pitch, they weren't invited. They specifically were not invited. No, sorry, Chuck, you can't come unless you bring one of your own investors with you. And then we let that happen. It didn't happen that first year, but eventually we made a deal with a couple of organizations. We ended up for several years doing one of these things at ISDC in the spring, and then we have our own event at some third-party site in the fall. We're doing 2 a year there through 2012, and then we let it sit for a little bit, and then around 2017 we started doing them again, and we've done at least one virtual one, and we've done a bunch of them at various conferences. And actually, we went international with that before we went international with the BBC. We did one, I think it was 2017 in Luxembourg as part of New Space Luxembourg.
Yep.
That fall of that year, and that was the first time we did it there, and really opened it up to the European community, and they just loved it. One of our co-sponsors was Candace Johnson, who is, if you know her, she's the founder of SES.
Yep.
So huge connection to make, and she was a judge in Paris this last year too. So we still stay in touch and try to do some things together. Any questions about Space Investment Summit? Because there's a lot we could go into, and you have the time, and that could be a special thing all on its own. There's
going to be some stuff coming up here. We'll probably come back to the Space Investment Summit here on another call. To wrap this up, I want to make sure that everybody knows that we're going to bring each of you back in the next couple of weeks. To talk about the Space Frontier Foundation and the Pioneers program there.
Okay.
Those shows will not be live. They will not be live. We'll be doing them taped, but we'll broadcast them at our other times. So, on speaking from West Coast time, our shows are from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock on Mondays and Wednesdays. Once a month, the Mars Society hosts a program with us called Red Planet Live, and the other 3 Tuesdays of the month, we're going to be hosting the Pioneers program from the Space Frontier Foundation. So we'll bring you guys, both of you, back to this program to really dig into the history of being a space advocate, really from the beginning, those earliest days. And your various roles there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign us off here. It's always great having you. Like I said, I've known Tom for 20 years. I've only known Jeff for 11. So sorry, you're a newcomer to my party.
I remember, Michael, when we met, you and I were in one of either the first or second of the BPCs as competing companies, and that's how when we met.
Yeah. All right. With that, I just want to remind everybody to share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's over at youtube.com/liftport. We do have the beginnings of our episodes showing up on Spotify, so definitely take a look at that. That's Spotify. Do a search for Dare Greatly Space. There's a lot of people with the phrase Dare Greatly, so Dare Greatly Space. And this episode will be up here probably in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We have a bit of a backlog that we just cleared actually today. We were doing some stuff for the Mars Society, and so now we're really focusing on our own stuff. And that's it. That's what we got. So thanks to my team. I really appreciate it. We couldn't do this stuff without y'all. Leah and Jen and Sinki and Rachel and Yusuf. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate all your work. Tom, Jeff, thanks always. Y'all have been doing important work for a really long time. So thank you for all that you do for our industry.
Thanks.
What's that?
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Happy to have you. All right.
Absolutely.
Good night, y'all. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.